All right. It's about 10, so we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you very much for electing to spend your morning with us, attending the Arizona Preservation Foundation occasional webinar series. We're excited to present today a, um, a great and interesting talk on the entitled Hidden in Plain Sight, Uncovering the Secret History of the Pinal County Airpark by Annie Lutes. But first, let me introduce myself. My name is Margaret Hangen. I am the large project archaeologist with the Tonto National Forest, and I assist Arizona Preservation Foundation with developing and putting on these webinars. And I'm proud to introduce Jim McPherson, the president of Arizona Preservation Foundation, who will hopefully provide some welcoming words.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Jim McPherson, volunteer board president of the Arizona Preservation Foundation. And we put on these webinars in partnership with the State Historic Preservation Office here in the state of Arizona. A little bit of history. Right before COVID happened, we were deciding what to do with our annual conference. And we decided, because of COVID, that we needed to go virtual. And when we went virtual, we decided, and the conference was very successful that way. We had many more people that we would normally have in person. And we decided to keep the Zoom contract going and add on to other ways to help communicate the message about historic preservation, archaeology, interesting topics of like we're hearing today through a webinar series and now a book club. So on behalf of the Arizona Preservation Foundation, thank you for joining us today. We want to hear from you about what future topics you'd like to hear about, learn about, and we will continue to keep that Zoom account open so we can do more things and reach more people to advance the cause of preservation here and across the nation. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Well, it's my pleasure to introduce my friend, Annie Lutes, and I'll give you a little bio on her. Annie is an architectural historian, archaeologist, and project manager with 17 years of professional experience in the Southwest. She currently serves as a lead architectural historian in Arizona for SWCA Environmental Consultant, where she provides her expertise in cultural resource management and heritage conservation. Take it away, Annie.
Okay. Hi, everybody, and happy Thursday. I wanted to acknowledge some familiar names on the screen, especially Matthew. Matthew co-presented a version of this presentation to a bunch of airport folks oh gosh, that would have been, what was that, 2 years ago now, Matthew, for the spring Arizona Airport Association conference when it was in Tucson. So I've given some various versions of this presentation, but I've never been able to kind of present all of it, so to speak. And I've had to truncate and focus and stuff like that, and kind of delete slides and leave out slides due to time constraints. So I'm kind of excited to drop in as many slides as I have. This was a project that we were contracted with. Our prime was Dibble Engineering. And we were tasked with conducting cultural resources survey across the entire airpark. It had been triggered by a Section 106 undertaking, at least the archaeological survey, but Pinal County kind of was very forward thinking, and Pinal County decided, you know what, do the whole property, just for archaeology and for built environment. Let's understand what we have, let's preserve what we should. And so the work that I did was it was a facet of a larger effort that also involved like archaeological survey to get kind of these two reports that serve kind of a planning purpose now with, you know, as the air park begins to, you know, develop and stuff. And there's a big backstory with the Pinal County Airpark. And I'm going to kind of start at the beginning. But there's a background in terms of that I really haven't had time to set up in the past with presentations, that from 1975 until 2012, the Pinal Airpark was actually closed to the public. The public was not allowed at the facility. I will talk about the then operator toward the end of the historic context section. And so the county was even kept out of their own property. So they were out of compliance with the FAA. They went through a lot of work once the tenant back then, they essentially kind of folded, and they have gotten their back in compliance with their certification and stuff like that with the FAA. But my work here that I'm going to present today is part of that kind of rebuilding phase that happened after 2012. Pinal County stepped in and was like, listen, we're, you know, this is our air park facility, and you know, just kind of planning for the future. And there is a big chunk of history in the 80s that is super fascinating that I won't get to, but if anyone else is interested, it involves a training facility to learn how to be kidnapped for rich people. And so it even continues through like the 80s and 90s with kind of this sensational history. But I will get started. So the Pinal County Airpark is a 1,600-acre commercial aircraft storage, maintenance, repair, and overhaul. We call it an MRO facility. And it's located right at the border of southern Pinal County. Like literally to the south is Pima County. So it is like northwest of Marana. Many people will drive I-10, and whether you're headed north or south, you'll look to the west and you'll see these dark outlines of all of these planes of these aircraft. And there have been various tales and stories and legends of, you know, what is out there in the desert. And it was often referred to as a boneyard. Oh yeah, the boneyard north of Marana. I know where that is. Well, it's not a proper boneyard. There is a proper boneyard in Tucson at Davis-Monthan. There aren't pieces of aircraft out, you know, it's a storage facility. During COVID, they actually, when there were not a lot of flights, they filled that whole property with planes. Spirit Airlines, Delta, American Airlines, they were all lined up. And sometimes you can come across, depending on the scale in Google Earth you're in or Google Maps, you can see all those planes. And it was kind of interesting because the work we did in 2019 prepared for that. They were cleared in terms of Section 106 to be able to accommodate all of the grounded aircraft from the commercial airline industry during the pandemic. There's no current commercial airline service, so there's no you know, major or even minor airline that serves the air park. There is the Western Army Aviation Training Site. It's the heliport, which is on the north side of the property, and I'll show you a map in a second. There's helicopter operations and training that happens there, and then to the west is parachute training and testing conducted by the U.S. Department of Defense, the Special Operations Command. They call it SOCOM. And so still to this day, you'll see planes take off, you'll see parachutes in the sky. And those are the types of high-level military specialists like Army Rangers, Navy SEALs. That's the type of training that SOCOM does out there. If you research in the newspaper archives, you'll actually come across, it becomes interesting in the 80s and 90s with how many accidents and lives that have been lost in that desert from these high-level operations training jumps. They do the high altitude low opening. They do the high ho and the hey ho, like the high altitude high opening, high altitude low opening, and they do all those kinds of exercises. And when we were out there, we were not allowed to capture any of those activities because those are Department of Defense. So none of those photos or anything, we did not, we made sure we were not taking photographs while active training operations were going on. So just to orient you, here we are, we're in, you can see the county line, and that's Pinal Airpark. That at the time was the proper property boundary that the county owned. And you can see Marana, and it's off in the, just situated kind of amongst all of these, like this undeveloped desert and agricultural fields. And so here is an aerial. It's a few years old now, but you can see kind of the main components of the Pinal County Airpark. You'll see, I pointed out the Arizona Army National Guard heliport to the north, and then the SOCOM facility down in the southwest corner. And that big triangle is what we call the storage triangle. But it used to be a series of 3 runways that historically were used for air pilot training. And then you can see that big U-shaped up in the northeast corner. Like, keep that in mind. You'll see it a few times in this presentation. Those are called, that space inside there is called the parade grounds. And then we call that, you know, the cadet loop for short. And then you have all the planes. There's all of those buildings that are along the runway and the airport apron. And so you can see up here, this little twisty thing, that is the little driving training track that initially started as law enforcement training in the 80s and in the 90s became where celebrities would pay big money to come learn how to avoid being kidnapped. And I'm not kidding, it's great. So in terms of key timelines, I wanted to define some terminology before we kind of dive in. In terms of evaluation for the National Register of Historic Places, as many of us know, we have to develop historic context within which to evaluate cultural resources, in this case, built environment resources. Again, I didn't do the archaeology side of things. If a building was standing and it was intact, you know, condition aside, it was my territory. If it were just a foundation, if it was in ruins and it were, you know, at least 50 years old, that we classified that as an archaeological resource. So, and it's overlapping. This is an example of an overlapping landscape with historic era built environment, so architectural resources, building structures, but also remnants of those from the past. And so the Pinal County Airpark has gone through several kind of these evolutionary periods. This is what I kind of like to look at it. And so when we're developing a historic context, we want to identify periods of significance, and there may be more than one. So what I did was I went through the newspaper archives, and it's interesting to see how over time the name changed out there. Now it's the Pinal County Airpark. For a long time, it was just the Pinal Airpark. But when Pinal County kind of, you know, like reclaimed it, they insert Pinal County Airpark because it's the county's airpark. And it's really a remarkable property. And hopefully I'll mention it several times that I can provide you the contact information of the airport manager, Jim Petty. He's wonderful. And to go out and see it, it's really cool. And they do public tours. And so you can see these things in person, which I think is really, really neat. So before you, you have 4 periods. So you have the Marana Army Airfield from 1942 to 1945. So if you were to pull open my big old report, you would see these as kind of chapter subheadings. So when I refer to the Marana Army Airfield, that is its World War II, manifestation. And then we had a period of kind of inactivity, and then it was reactivated as the Marana Air Base. In the newspaper, you'll see Marana Air Force Base. You'll see the Air Base. I went through and I tracked every kind of reference in the newspaper archive to the airpark. So from 51 to 57 is what I call like the Korean War era, and then the post-war era. And then we enter into a very interesting period of time for the airpark, which begins in 1960. And it was known as the Marana Airpark, and you'll see that titled in newspapers as well. And then in 1975, it went through some different names, but a lot of it in the newspaper archive just referred to Pinal Airpark in terms of, it was also called the Evergreen Air Center for a while. So these are the 4 periods of time to keep in mind. And this was setting up for the evaluation for significance to see, to determine through scholarly research if any of these periods rose to the level of a significant period in history with important themes, particularly related to aviation, but also these different periods in and of themselves have their own themes. So Marana Army Airfield was World War II. So, and then the Marana Air Base was the Korean War. And then the Marana Airpark was kind of this Cold War era. So those are different themes in aviation that we may consider significant. So in terms of the beginnings of the Pinal County Airpark, we have a lot of airfields, particularly in Arizona, that are associated with World War II. But prior to our formal entry into the war, they were more like like we had some British pilots that came to like Falcon Field in the Phoenix area, Williams area, the Williams field area. So keep in mind, there are kind of 2 sets of airfields that I think of. We have like the pre-Pearl Harbor, where we were not in it. We were just kind of, but come train and we'll, it's obvious what side we're on. Pearl Harbor changed the game for us as a nation, as a country, and on December 7th, 1941, when we were attacked at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii by the Japanese, we had to get involved. And so you have Japan, and then you have Germany. And so we were staying out of, the conflict with Germany. But we really were forced to do something. And when we talk about our entry into World War II, the U.S. immediately prioritized increasing its defense capabilities because we needed to prevent a second attack. And this happened within days. And we were mobilizing. It was such a fast response. They immediately set about trying to determine how far in could another attack go. Hawaii was not the lower 48, but if they were to reach our coasts, California, Washington, Oregon, or, Maine, New York, even Florida, how far in could potentially enemy forces get to drop bombs or attack before we could respond? And so keeping in mind that distance from the coastline was a really important factor in determining these post-Pearl Harbor airfields. So what you have is the Army Air Force, the AAF, and they're the precursor to the U.S. Army Air Force, so the USAF that we know today. They established what is known as the Air Corps Flying Training Command. And there ended up being like 3 commands. There was the West that to oversee different facilities within different parts of the country. And so what ended up happening is this is called the 273 Group Program. It was the first program after we were attacked in Pearl Harbor. And this came together within a few weeks after the attack on December 7th. And they set a goal for training 70,000 new pilots each year. And so we need 70,000 fighter pilots to defend not only the homeland, but go overseas and enter the conflict. So how are we going to do this? So the Air Corps Flying Training Command, the ACFTC, started to survey for airfield locations. And we're taught like these were well underway by mid-January of 1942. So a month and a week later, they were surveying everywhere. It was in the newspaper. There are a lot of declassified military documents that talk about how many different contingents of representatives they sent out and how they were starting to determine where to put these airfields. And so they kind of honed in on a 2,000-acre site 30 miles northwest of Tucson, Arizona. They were also honing in on Bisbee Douglas. They were also looking at Kingman. They were this, I want to, kind of reiterate that the Marana Army Airfield was not the only airfield in Arizona that was established following the attack on Pearl Harbor. We have several, and there are a lot of reasons for that. We have wonderful year-round climate. We don't, with the exception of Flagstaff, and I was in Flagstaff for 12 years. There's no Army airfield around Flagstaff at that elevation, but Kingman, they're desert climate, dry. We have monsoons, but we have relatively mild weather compared to other parts of the country. It was prime, pristine flying climate. So it was kind of immediately the desert Southwest was on the proverbial radar, no pun intended, of the Army Air Force. So you can see by this timeline here, we're attacked on December 7th. A handful of weeks later, they're already out on the ground trying to find locations for airfields. And work began at the Marana Army Airfield on April 16th, 1942. And so these airfields were established to train pilots. And there are several different types of training. There's basic training, there's specialized training, there's ground school, there's flight exercises. So the military had different training curricula, and we hadn't been in a real war since World War I, and the late 1910s, 1918 and stuff like that, that we flying aviation had come a long way from the 1918, 1919 to World War II in the 1940s. And you'll recall, hopefully from your European history classes, if you didn't do it in college, maybe in high school, is that the unrest and the started in Europe well before 1941, 42 when we got involved. It was all throughout the 30s. You knew stuff, the Hitler's regime was coming into power in the 30s, and so we all heard about it. You heard about it on the US side, but that was over there. Well, it was no longer over there after the attack on Pearl Harbor. So this is a 1942 general layout plan. Every airfield had one of these. And I've done several surveys at these airfields, and The Marana Army Airfield was the first one where I found out about these general layout plans. And these are hopefully in city and county archives, or, you know, they already have them as part of their planning documents. What was really awesome is Pinal County's like, here, we have this. And so all of these Army airfields had these general layout plans, and they were called, essentially, it was the Corps of Engineers. So what we know as USACE, or the Corps today, the Army Corps of Engineers was responsible for building and constructing and designing these airfields in World War II. So this general layout plan is literally this kind of building schedule that was established. You can see the storage triangle, you can see the runway outline, you can see the parade grounds, you can see all the roads. Each of those buildings has a number, and that number ties to a building schedule that's actually at the bottom of this big layout plan. And it's a certain type of building. Because if you think about it, if you think about what does it take to build a facility like this, with all those barracks, with all those mess halls, with all of those facilities for enlisted men, for officers, for the trainers, for the higher up military folks that are on site in any given day. You've got a lot of moving parts that have to come together. So how did they make that happen? They made that happen by implementing a program that is known as temporary mobilization construction. It was, there are plans everywhere. There are specific plans. They're all built the same way. And you'll, like, this is a storage building. There were several of these storage buildings at Pinal. There were several of these very same storage buildings at Bisbee Douglas and at Kingman and at other airfields in Arizona. It was essentially, it was a way to standardize buildings and build them fast. And it simplified everything, and it allowed them to move quickly to build these airfields. So because the biggest goal was to just, you know, like that, the get her done and get them flying is a headline from one of the local newspapers, is get them in the air, get this built, get this done, get them trained, get them overseas. So construction began, as I mentioned, in April 1942, and the first cadets showed up at the end of August 1942. And when they showed up, there's a wonderful, it's a declassified Army Air Force document that talks about what these cadets saw when they showed up, because it wasn't done yet. But they're like, all right, show up. It was dusty. It was noisy. There were people walking all over the place. Planes were not yet in the air, but they had talked about how supplies were flown in, and there were too many prairie dogs on these dirt runways. And so they would have to go out, and they literally kind of played whack-a-mole with the prairie dogs because they were so numerous, and, you know, they obviously couldn't chase them away to get the runways cleared. It just, you can kind of start to picture, you know, these young men kind of stumbling off of a bus and looking around and not really knowing what to expect, because this was kind of the first time that anybody had been through this. And, you know, where's the mess hall? Where do I go? Where do I check in? What am I doing? Do I really want to do this? Oh my gosh, I'm going to war. And how chaotic that would have been. And then it was still another kind of several weeks before most of the facilities were completed, you know, in September of 1942. So we're really talking about a very, like, chaotic environment. And so one thing that makes the Pinal Airpark and Marana Army Airfield really unique in a way is that it wasn't just white enlisted men and white officers being both groups of men that were stationed and trained at the Marana Army Airfield. We had a Black contingent, and we had women. So we have these wonderfully scanned yearbook photos, and these yearbooks are at the county building at the Pinal Airpark. And this is the 977th Quartermaster Detachment. And this was a, like I said, a Black contingent. And the military didn't enforce Jim Crow laws. You know, remember this, the 1940s, this is before civil rights. This is, our, Black citizens did not have the rights that white people did. And so the Jim Crow laws, the separate, like they didn't enforce like the separate drinking fountains they claimed, but they acknowledged the need for separation under the guise of it's distracting. So while the military would say we do not enforce Jim Crow laws, they still ascribed to a policy that was separate but equal, because they argued that Jim Crow laws were separate but not equal. So this was the stance when it came to housing and personnel support for the Black enlisted men, and they believed it was better for morale, and that they should have entirely separate accommodations. And there were no specialized plans like I showed you the building on the previous slide. That's a 700 series building. It was actually adapted from some of the mobilization that happened, the designs that the Corps had from World War I that developed into the 30s. There weren't any special like barracks buildings or anything that had been specifically designed for the Black detachments. And and then the women, like, and I love this is from the newspaper. This is the Wild Women of the WWII, the Women's Auxiliary Corps, showing the men how it's done to do a gas mask drill. And so the women, the first group of women under the Women's Auxiliary Corps showed up in May of 1943 at the Marana Army Airfield, and they were afforded all the rights and benefits of soldiers. And they, if the 977th Quartermaster Detachment had separate but equal facilities, the ladies had separate but better. And it's kind of interesting in the newspaper how they, how there's kind of like, oh, they have a better mess hall. Oh, they have a better, they had better facilities. And the women of the WWII actually became a full part of the U.S. Army in July of 1943. So just a few months after they showed up. And I don't know how many people actually know this, because I didn't until I researched this, is that women of the Women Auxiliary Corps, they landed on the beaches of Normandy right behind the combat troops. So it's not, they weren't the Rosie the Riveters back repairing the planes. These women truly participated in the war effort and went overseas and landed on foreign soil. And so I want to preface this by, there is so much more research to be done with both the Black enlisted men, and you will see they were called colored contingents, back in the 40s. So that's how they appear in the archival record. So and then the Women's Auxiliary Corps, it was WAAC, and then it became the WAC because they were the Women's Army Auxiliary Corps, and then they were the Women's Auxiliary Corps. There is so much more research to be done on these groups that fall outside the white enlisted men and the white officers. And these are two kind of research areas that are always in the back of my mind that I am going to go down the rabbit holes to do, because this was so fascinating. And the fact that they are both at Marana Airpark, not every airfield had a quartermaster detachment. Not every airfield had a WWII unit. And sure as heck, not everyone had both. So it's really awesome to see how these dynamics worked on this airfield. And keep in mind, the airfield was only in operation from like the fall of 1942 for a few years until the end of World War II, which I will get to. So we also have, which is also one of the more unique aspects of the Marana Army Airfield, is we trained Chinese pilots. So they received far more, the Chinese enlisted men received far more attention in the newspapers than the WACS, the Women's Auxiliary Air Corps, or the Black Detachment. And it was actually really hard to track down information on the 977th. To be completely honest, most of the references in the newspaper were if one of the enlisted men of the 977th was caught, like where he wasn't supposed to be, or was caught driving a car in town, like because of the nature of how the white majority treated minorities and underrepresented groups. So it's doing this research, you also have to get into those terms, and terms that we exclude and that we don't use anymore. You have to pull those out and do your newspaper searches and your archival searches using those terms. And they are not kind. So this is really neat. You can see how some of their faces are blurred out. And this was a photograph that was behind a display case, but those faces are intentionally removed. And I don't know why. I have my suspicions, but so the Chinese cadets, and I want to read a quote because it's so fantastic. These, keep in mind, Japan attacked us at Pearl Harbor. So you really see when you go back to World War II and then the Korean War and then the Cold War and then where we are now is how much we flipped back and forth between being allies with China and then Japan and then all of these other different countries, and how it waxed and waned depending on just who was in conflict with whom. So the Chinese cadets had, and I quote, "one aim and one mission: to complete training and return home to unleash the wrath that has been burning within them for many years since the hateful invader, the Japanese, set foot on Chinese territory." And that is from the Arizona Daily Sun from 1943. And so these are the Chinese cadets. They didn't get, unlike the 977th, which is marked on that general layout plan that I talked about, it says EM colored on their section of the airpark, or the Army airfield at the time. And then the WACs were up in the northwest corner, and they're actually labeled. The Chinese are not. And I don't know if they maybe had a barrack to themselves and maybe ate together in the same mess halls as the enlisted men. So this is another realm of research that is on my list. Or if anyone is suddenly like wants to go down these research avenues, like please let me know because I will help. There we go. There's a lot of just different demographic and ethnic and racial themes to be uncovered and identified and explored more at the Marana Army Airfield during World War II. So, but keep in mind, we train these Chinese cadets to fight the Japanese during World War II. And ironically, in the coming years, when it comes to the Korean War, so just some years later, we're talking 42, 43, 44, 45. Korean War starts 50, 51. It is not out of the realm of possibility that the Chinese cadets that we trained at Marana and also elsewhere across the country turned on us and fought against us during the Korean War, which I find really kind of an interesting, little plot twist with the training that we did during World War II and how we brought over, it was the British and other, Allied forces before Pearl Harbor, and then we really brought in as many bodies as we could train to get into the air. But the Chinese are a really unique group that we trained as fighter pilots during World War II. So Germany surrendered on May 7th, 1945. And it was at this time that the Army Air Force announced it would be cutting the aviation cadet program. We're still dealing with Japan at this time. And it was shortly thereafter, like in June, that the AAF announced, okay, we're going to close Marana. But it's a temporary closure, and it's going to be in September, but it's temporary. We're just kind of getting our bearings. And then in August 15th, 1945, Japan surrendering went a little differently. They announced it ahead of time. They announced it like a month ahead of time. Japan's like, we're throwing in the towel, we're going to surrender. So a lot of things happened in August and September when Japan formally surrendered and the war ended. So once Japan announced that they were going to surrender, the Army Air Force decided, okay, yeah, it's going to be permanent. We don't need it anymore. So starting September 15th, I call it the obituary of the Marana Army Airfield. By this time, when they had announced that it was going to be a temporary closure, like that whole last summer, like cadets kind of graduated quietly. They used to announce these graduating classes in the newspaper and take out like, congrats, class at 43K. And but they graduate quite, some were transferred off without even, they were like, okay, we're taking you to a different facility. And some of them never even finished their training. And by the time that Marana closed at the end of September 1945 officially, that's where just a couple people remained to kind of watch the facility. Over 150 airfields had been essentially demobilized and shut down across the country. So we enter a time where there's a hiatus at the Marana Army Airfield. And I called it the relinquished to the desert period. So from 46 to 50, the Army wasn't quite sure what they were going to do. They decided to declare most of the buildings surplus and remove them. A lot of them were sold to the public. Amphitheater High School got a brand new to them cafeteria. And it was advertised that at the former Air Force Base, that there were excellent deals and priced for a quick sale. So they just started to unload buildings. And if you remember, they're temporary. They were built on concrete slabs and you could literally move them. And then it was also at this time in 1948 that Pinal County officially gained title to the 2,200-acre, now defunct airfield from the War Assets Department in 1948. And this is what I'll refer to as the deed agreement, the 1948 deed agreement. And there were two major provisions for this deed agreement. The first was that the land must be utilized and maintained for aviation purposes, and that it must be done in a manner that benefits the public. So there were two criteria that they had to meet. And if they didn't, the land would revert back to the military. So what we have is they began selling everything off, but then on June 25th, 1950, forces in what today we call North Korea crossed the 38th parallel and into what we now call South Korea. And China became involved in January 1951 when Seoul was seized. So that's when China switches sides, essentially, or we switch sides depending on how you look at it. So we decided, we got involved in the Korean War, and on January 1st, 1951, the Air Force established the 95 wing program, and they decided, not the 70,000 of World War II, but we needed 7,200 new pilots to be ready for action to send them to the Korean peninsula. And by this time, there were only 2 airfields that were still operating. One was Williams Airfield, now Williams Air Force Base in the Phoenix area, and the other was Randolph in Texas. So we had quickly unloaded everything, demobbed, mothballed, cleared a lot of those World War II airfields. So when the military, the Air Training Command, it was now called the ATC, they eliminated some words, they reinitiated the flying program that had been so effective during World War II, except the military was not going to be running these training programs directly. They decided to contract these out. And so the former Marana Army Airfield at Marana fit the really strict requirements that the USAF had established for training sites. So Marana is about it's 1,890 feet above sea level. And so they didn't want their airfields any higher than 3,000 feet because their training exercises took pilots 8,000 feet up. And that's not 8,000 feet like elevation, that's actually 11,000. So they had to, because these exercises, they used 8,000 feet of vertical space. They needed to find, sites that were appropriate elevation because they didn't want to have to use supplemental oxygen. And at that time, supplemental oxygen was required at 10,000 feet and above. So with that 8,000 foot window of training, the under 2,000 feet of elevation at Marana brought them just under that threshold to have to supply their pilots with supplemental oxygen. So that's a neat little trivia tidbit if it ever comes up at a party or something like that. So this is a 1950s yearbook. You can see the cadet loop, the parade grounds from World War II. Really, really neat photos that I got access to. So we enter the time of the Marana Air Base. And so, the World War II temporary mobilization buildings, some of them were still there. A lot of them were actually still there. But they were only meant to last like 5 to 25 years. They were not meant to be permanent. And Hal S. Dar of Dar Aerotech, his name is really well more recognized back east. He was awarded one of 4 contracts initially to build and operate a primary flight training and ground school. And so what became known as the Marana Army Air Base would become one of just 9 in the country. So instead of hundreds of airfields training thousands of pilots, there were 9 across the country training for the Korean War. Some of the remaining World War II buildings were demolished. A lot of them were called, oh, they're so decrepit and ugly. Others were repurposed. It's kind of like, let's stick some asbestos siding here. Let's put some, like cement tile over here. Like, it is new, right? We can use this. We can work with this. But then there were also new buildings that were built, and they were permanent. They were built of concrete block, which for those that do architectural history and history, that concrete was a very popular material after World War II. A lot like glass, cement, steel, those were all limited because stockpiles were sent for the war effort. And so after World War II, you get this resurgence of, modernism and using these materials and really celebrating them and showcasing them in terms of, residential and commercial and architectural design. But we, as plain as you might think these 1950s buildings are at Pinal Airpark, they are really quite representative of the time because they were built of concrete block. They built a mess hall, a cadet club, the church administration building, and academic buildings, airlink trainer buildings, and there were 32 barracks. And the barracks were around the cadet loop. So in World War II, there were no barracks around the loop. So that loop, those barracks are strictly from the Korean War. So here are those barracks. This in the front is the officers club. There's a pool. These are the parade grounds. There's the mess hall and the post exchange. We have and then you can see in the very back, you see a World War II hangar. And then you see the World War II control tower. And all of these classroom buildings along the apron, those were all built in the 50s. So we trained not only our own, but by this time, NATO, the North American Trade Organization, was in place. And because of the Mutual Defense System Act of 1949, we trained, and I have to read this list because it's so long, we trained pilots from Belgium, France, Great Britain, Italy, Holland, Portugal, Denmark, Norway, Chile, Cuba, Sweden, Turkey, and Iran. Because keep in mind, Iran went through a revolution, and at this time they were very westernized when the Shah was in power. So and that will change and that will become relevant. So this is the cadet area of the Marana Air Base. And so, but what happened is unlike World War II, the Korean War didn't really end. If you think about it, nobody surrendered. They signed an armistice. And so that was July 20th, 1953. And unlike World War II, there was no demobilization of buildings. They kept training out there. Dar left in 1953. He actually took over the distributorship of the Caterpillar company, like equipment in Texas. In December 1954, the Marana Air Base stopped training cadets only, and they would only do officers. So you can start to see that activity reduce. Dar passed away in 55, and then we have Frank Beiser, and he stepped in. He was kind of Dar's right-hand man the whole time during the Korean War. He was his longtime general manager of Dar Aerotech. And, by this time, before it shut down, the contractor-operated pilot school at Marana was the most expensive in the entire country. And so when the war ended and the training continued, it continued until about 1956, and he just didn't get renewed. They stopped there. And so Beiser switched into, they had always done this. What kept them afloat after this from 57 to 60 was really repairing helicopters for Davis Monthan. They also did aircraft rehabilitation, but that was kind of their bread and butter until they finally had to throw in the towel as well. Beiser Aviation Corp, which became the name after Frank took over, he operated just for a year, and they yanked his contract. They didn't renew it, but they had trained 4,000 pilots between 1951 and 1957. And he continued to operate his aircraft overhaul and maintenance facility. So now you can see today, Pinal County Airpark is an MRO maintenance, repair, overhaul facility. And so that activity is really a historical legacy that began in the 50s. So he operated there until 1960. There are ads in the newspaper at this time where he's auctioning off. And it's actually really sad. Some of his, and I'm not going to get into his interviews, but I have these articles and it's really sad. You can tell he's just, it's the end of an era for him and the work he did during the Korean War at Marana. And this is a photograph provided by Frank Weiser Jr. to Jim, who is at the time, Jim Petty was the manager of just Pinal Airpark, but now he's the airport director for Pinal County. And Frank is like here, I think, looking at everybody else. So, and this was you can see the 334th delivery of an overhauled plane, which was December, I think it was 12th, 1958. So this is where things get interesting, and this is why you're all here. So when Frank Weiser, his legacy ended, in enters the Sonora Flying Service. And this is where in 1960, where it starts to be known as the Marana Airpark. And so the Sonora Flying Service began a 10-year lease holding a contract with the U.S. Forest Service to provide retrofitted aircraft and support services for wildland firefighting, as well as training a small number of pilots in the art of aerial operations for wildland firefighting. I was a wildland firefighter for a few years at the Coconino National Forest. I have operated underneath helicopter bucket drops and fire retardant. It's a lot of skill involved, as you know, as we all know. So they train pilots in how to apply, because fire retardant was just coming into the market. It was actually invented in California, used first by the Sonora Flying Service. So Arizona was one of the first states to have that slurry. And so they would mix these certain types of these components together. They had tanks there. They had tanks at Bisbee Douglas. So you can, there starts to be a pattern with our old airfields across Arizona as they double as seasonal firefighting operations, bases, for lack of a better word. But like Sonora Flying Service was like, oh, we wanted more. Let's get into the resort industry. So you too, in 1960, could enjoy resort-style living at the Marana Airpark. You can see the 1950s barracks were transformed. You can see duplexes. Those white H shapes are former barracks that were converted into duplexes. We have, you know, the clubhouse, the officers club became a restaurant. And this was just the you know, they refurbished the pool, they redid all of the living quarters and areas. There was a supermarket in that cross-shaped building at the bottom, which was the mess hall and the post exchange. That became a grocery store. The old theater, which is in the lower left-hand corner of this image, was turned into a bowling alley. That is gone. And the church is actually to the northwest corner of the cross-shaped building. That's the church, and that's still there. So, and they advertised this in the newspaper, that you could come stay. I did find one reference in the newspaper that apparently claimed that if you called that number, nobody answered. So, but, and this is a lot of the buildings still, the duplexes are still converted to duplexes. So the Sonora Flying Service did a lot of work. So the Sonora Flying Service kind of disappears out of the newspaper archives. And what I did through this whole time, it took me days to research this. I chased names. I chased names of people. I chased names of companies. I chased names of organizations. I chased all kinds of different names, like different combinations thereof, in the newspaper archive. And so Intermountain Aviation appeared. And they first appeared in the Arizona Daily Star in early 1962. The company has the same CEO as the Sonora Flying Service, Bob Roberts. Robert Roberts. Yes, Robert Roberts. And Intermountain Aviation also retrofits aircraft for the U.S. Forest Service. So I kind of suspect that the Sonora Flying Service may have become Intermountain Aviation. Maybe they bought each other out. And the Sonora Flying Service appears in other newspapers around the entire state in the early 60s. I love finding references to Pinal Airpark at other airfields and airports. So they retrofit aircraft. They also perfected additional technology that I'll talk about for aerial firefighting operations, and including the Fulton Skyhook and cargo drop systems. And the Fulton Skyhook was a technology that started as mail. During the war, a plane would fly over with a hook and pick up mail. It was initially like a mail transport service, and then somewhere, somehow, somebody thought, if not a mail bag, why not a person? So, and there, I have the history in my report of how Fulton tested it on sheep first, those poor sheep. And there is an instance of a test where the sheep got yanked up, spun around, and he landed. He was fine, but he was really mad, and he chased everyone around and then like disappeared into the field. And so, yeah, they tested it on sheep, and they hadn't tested it on people yet. So, what you have here is the start of a very public period for the Pinal Airpark. So if you can picture the parade grounds at the airpark, and what you have are 90 Forest Service personnel that are gathering on the parade grounds, and they're there for a technical demonstration. So on the left, we have Danny the dummy. Yes, that is his name. He was the first test subject for the Fulton Skyhook. So Intermountain Aviation employee Bob Nickel helps Danny get ready for his maiden voyage. And so what you have is, that's a B-17 bomber up at the top, and it was fixed with a V-shaped attachment to the front and a hook. And so what would happen, the way this system worked, is there would be a gas-filled balloon, and it was attached to a 500-foot long rope. And the balloon would be sent into the air. And so these Forest Service personnel are watching this. They're like, what are you doing? Wow, is that, no, okay, Danny the dummy. And Danny's balloon gets let go. And so it hangs there, like it's up 500 feet up. People are like, what's going on? And suddenly in the distance, you hear this engine. You hear a plane. You're like, wow, that sounds like a big plane. And B-17s were a World War II bombers. So you hear this, and suddenly it appears out of the distance, and it starts flying really low. And everyone's like, what is going on? Like, you know, and so the plane flies low, and the hook on the front snags the rope of the balloon. And so it's going, and you can picture Danny just kind of goes straight up in the air and does this gentle arc. And so you can kind of see all these bewildered Forest Service employees like watching Danny the dummy like ascend into the heavens. And so the plane was flying at 125 miles an hour. And he was 300 feet below the plane, and he began swinging wildly. The winch got stuck, and they could not get Danny into the plane. And so they start to circle Marana. They start to circle the airpark, being like, oh my gosh, he's not. And he was swinging wildly, just out of control. And they finally hoisted him up. And in this newspaper article, this Forest Service official is like, I'd have to be really desperate and really needing to get out of somewhere for me to try to get out that way. And so it wasn't like, was it a success? Was it a failure? The Forest Service wasn't interested. Intermountain Aviation brought the Forest Service like, look, this is how you can get your smoke jumpers out one by one, pull them out. And the Forest Service was like, I think we'll pass. I think we'll just stick with what we do. If it's not broke, why fix it? And so what happened is, so this was March 1962. And in August of 1963, the first publicized use of the Fulton Skyhook was to retrieve the body of a deceased scientist. His name was Jerome Hirschman, and he had gotten pneumonia at the Arctic Research Laboratory, which was about 80 miles south of the North Pole. And he hadn't wanted to leave. He didn't want to leave. And he ended up passing away at the station. So they used the Fulton Skyhook to retrieve his body. But I don't know how it went. It didn't say if he swung wildly, if the winch worked, but being passed away probably wouldn't have mattered so much. So that was the first published use of the Fulton Skyhook. And Intermountain Aviation did other things too. They perfected, so these are newspaper articles. These are actual parachutes from Pinal Airpark at this time, because people started to wonder what's going on. Why are all these strangely shaped parachutes coming out of the sky? Hello, Intermountain Aviation, what's going on? And they're like, well, let us show you. Come see. We'll have an open house and you can come walk through and we'll demonstrate. Actually, we'll have skydiving competitions. Do you want to skydive? We have skydivers. Come skydive with us. So they would have these public open houses that published in these full page ads to come see what we're doing. Come see these cool parachutes that we are designing to help the Forest Service. So apparently the Forest Service was having serious problems with supply drops during wildland fires. And I'm hoping some Forest Service people are like, what? Yeah. So apparently the Forest Service was having really substantial issues with food and water supply drops because they kept getting snagged on these really tall pine trees in southern Arizona. Right? So Intermountain Aviation, you have a problem, they answer. They devised all of these different kinds of chutes. And one of the parachutes, it's called the Timberline chute, it's over there on the right, it was specifically designed with a self-opening device because supply drops were coming out of planes with already open parachutes. So what Intermountain Aviation did is they had a weighted rope, so it had a weight on it. It was 150 feet long. It was attached to the bottom of the parcel, and it would reach the ground before the parcel. And when it would hit, it would trigger a cartridge to fire the parachute open. So hopefully, you can think about if it's 150-foot long rope. I mean, these trees are super tall, like 200 feet tall trees. In southern, a lot of this was done for the Coronado National Forest. So this was done for a specific forest. So they had a lot of problems with these supply drops. And they also were having issues with cargo drops, dropping parcels out of planes. So Intermountain Aviation came up with a cargo system to where the Forest Service could fly over a fire and drop 300 packages in a matter of seconds, because that is what they needed to effectively fight wildland fires in the Sonoran Desert. But Intermountain Aviation also used this cargo drop system for more humanitarian efforts. For instance, on the left this is from October 1967. These are fish flying out of the back. They are it's trout. And so they're dropping trout, I think, up in Lake Powell, because nobody else would help. So they're like, we can drop cargo to firefighters, we can drop fish. And then on Christmas in 1965, they used a cargo drop system to deliver toys and food to Supai Village at the bottom of Grand Canyon. And that's because Luke Air Force Base was asked and they said no. They said, no, we're not going to deliver supplies. the Havasupai, if I said Wallapai, that was wrong. The Havasupai, we will do it. So Intermountain Aviation was really in the public sphere. You knew Intermountain Aviation's name. And so here comes Hollywood. Has anyone seen the movie Thunderball with Sean Connery from 1965? That B-17 bomber is the same plane that you saw run that training demonstration in March 1962. That is the exact same B-17 bomber. It's the same B-17 bomber that Intermountain Aviation used to extricate the body of the scientist in August of 1963. It's the same one that lifts Sean Connery, so James Bond, out of trouble in Thunderball. So, and this poster was actually in my housemate's garage in my house in Flagstaff. I literally walked out and I was like, wow, that's Thunderball. I'm taking a picture of that. So it was in his garage. But all good things must come to an end eventually. So what we have is on August 11th, 1970, we have a plane crash. And this is what made the presentation at the airport conference in May of 2022 so kind of appropriate, is because it was held the Tucson National Golf Course, which is 19 miles southeast of Marana Airpark. And so what we have is we have a small plane crashed, and it carried the Larrys, Larry Greer and Larry Jensen, and they died instantly. And so it was published in the newspaper, and so people started digging. They're like, this aircraft doesn't look like something that we're familiar with. Like, what is it? Where did it come from? And a few days later, a short article appeared in the Arizona Republic, and it said, you know, there was a test plane with ties to the CIA. They're denied because things started to swirl that this was a modified aircraft and it was used for experimental purposes. And so people started to track this ownership, and they're like, oh, it's Beechcraft. Hey, Beechcraft Aircraft Company, what's up? And they're like, we leased that to a private company. We don't know what you're talking about. And so a top Tucson police official who requested anonymity alleged earlier that a light plane had crashed Tuesday and had been under on a mission under the CIA auspices. So that private company was called Univac Division. And it was like a subcorporation of the Sperry Rand Corporation. And they disclosed when asked that we had a plane that was classified secret by the military. We can't answer anything. So somebody actually inquired with the Pentagon, and the Pentagon is like, that aircraft was designed by Univac, don't look at us. And the CIA was asked, as you can see the quote, and they're like, so what's going on with this airplane? Like, the public wants to know. And the CIA is like, we don't engage in intelligence operations inside the United States. That's the FBI. And they're not wrong. Like, that is, like, the CIA was established as an agency specifically for intelligence operations overseas. So that was it, like 1970, 1971. And so Intermountain Aviation is like, this is ridiculous. We are dedicated to transporting smoke jumpers with our Fulton Skyhook, and we contribute to and support the wildland firefighting operations. Like, we don't do any of that. We don't do any of that spy stuff. And so things were quiet from 1970 to 1974. And they continued to advertise because they're like, maybe nobody will notice. Maybe this will all just kind of go away. Like, we store aircraft. We have an air service center. We have flight operations. You can come train to be a pilot. We have an inn. We have a lounge. We have a heated pool. We even put in tennis courts. And so we can cater your event. Come out to the Marana Army Airpark. And so they continued to advertise these other services while they continued to retrofit aircraft for the Forest Service. But then we have a Representative Morris K. Udall, who in June of 1974, he was quoted as saying, well, the Marana Airpark is a disguised base for the CIA and their worldwide activities. At least that's what I heard. And he claims he heard it directly from the CIA. And that was shortly after that plane crash in August of 1970. He just hadn't said anything yet. It took him 4 years to kind of mention that. And when Intermountain Aviation was asked, they're like, I don't know, ask the CIA. We don't do any of that. But then what happened in December of 1974, Intermountain Aviation's security classification was canceled and their clearance was revoked. And that comes to the Rockefeller report. And this thing is long, it is hard to navigate, and it is hard to find stuff. I have it. It was hard to find. If anyone wants it, I have a copy of it somewhere. On January 4th, 1975, President Ford established the Commission on the CIA's activities, because what that official said about the CIA is true. The CIA is legislated and mandated to conduct intelligence, operations, and activities overseas. They are not allowed to essentially spy on us. They're not allowed to surveil or track domestic activities. So that's why President Ford established the Rockefeller Commission to determine if the CIA had gone outside of its mandated jurisdiction and exceeded statutory authority and were actually conducting activities inside the country. And so the commission released its findings on June 6, 1975, in what is known as the Rockefeller Commission Report. And it was named for Nelson Rockefeller, who is the chairman of that commission. And the Rockefeller Report, and I found it to confirm, the Rockefeller Report officially identified Intermountain Aviation as one of a series of aviation companies that provided operational and logistics support, as well as cover, for the CIA's foreign covert operations, primarily in Southeast Asia. And to top it off, Intermountain Aviation was named and is named in the report as one of the CIA's most critical false front proprietaries for the agency. And it played a critical role in our activities against the Soviet Union and in Vietnam. So the cover unravels, and this is what I did. I pieced together from March 1962, the newspaper articles from the demonstration of the skyhook, and I went through the newspaper archive, and then I went into declassified CIA documents and public records, and I pieced the timeline together. And so what essentially happened was the public demonstration in March 1962 at the Marana Airpark was a field test. It was a field test for a covert operation in the Arctic Ocean called Project Cold Feet. And that happened just weeks later in 1962. Here we all thought that the first successful implementation of the Fulton Skyhook was extrication of the scientist's body in August of 1963. No, it wasn't. It was 6 weeks later. That same B-17 Flying Fortress, the same one at Pinal, the same one in Thunderball, dropped 2 CIA operatives at an abandoned Soviet drift station. It returned a week later to extricate both of them using the Fulton Skyhook. And we gained critical information on the advanced acoustical systems that the Soviets were developing specifically to detect our under ice US submarines from the Arctic base station. And so it was super wild, and it didn't stop there. All the parachutes, all the cargo drop systems that Intermountain Aviation touted were for the Forest Service were actually for Black entry operations into North Vietnam. And the paragraph on the right-hand side is from a declassified CIA. It's essentially like why we do what we do. It's like a guidebook for spies at the CIA. And I do have a copy of this too. A lot of faces are blacked out and a lot of stuff's redacted. So those self-opening parachutes and rapid cargo drops were not delivered for were not developed for the Coronado National Forest. And you know, all the tall, tall trees that they had problems dropping food and supplies to smoke jumpers too. They were developed because there were not suitable drop zones in Vietnam where we could deliver soldiers and supplies. And this is, like I said, this is from a declassified CIA document. It says, meanwhile, redacted. So that read Intermountain Aviation. An agency proprietary in Marana, Arizona, was working on impact opening devices and on new control lines to drop parachutes and 500-point bundles into stands of timber in Vietnam, not in the States. And so what you get is this, the Rockefeller report, everything, this was all blown wide open. So when those of us that remember the urban legends that, oh, the Pinal Airpark is a secret CIA base, like I have friends that grew up in Marana and in Tucson in the 70s and 80s, and they remember those stories. They were true. They were parts of the truth, but they were ultimately true because it operated as a false front for the CIA. And for years, from 1960, I don't have evidence of 1960, at least from 1962, up until they lost their security clearance in 1974. So this is a picture after Operation Cold Feet. Jim Petty gave me this. It is signed by a lot of the CIA operatives that took part in it. This is taken at the airpark right after they got back from that, bringing back the 2 CIA operatives from the Soviet base station. And this is a great shot of the Fulton Skyhook, that V-shaped contraption that's at the front. And again, this is the same B-17. And I actually have notes. I got sidetracked last year and I found this plane, the B-17 is, I found out where it was as of last year and it's escaping me right now. I think it's owned by the company I'm just about to talk about. This is a really neat shot. This is them getting back and celebrating that it was a success. And this was in June 1962. So what happens is a company called Evergreen International, and if you ever Google these guys, it's a lot of fun. I recommend it. They bought out Intermountain Aviation's interests, and they took over the airpark in 1975. And they are the reason the airpark was locked down and the public was kept out. So for folks that grew up in Marana and remember the dogs patrolling the perimeter, I have a friend who would, as a kid, run up and they'd dare each other to touch the fence and see how long the dogs took. Yeah, it was Evergreen International. So Evergreen International was in the business of retrofitting aircraft for wildland firefighting. Hey guys, isn't that cover blown? They retrofit air. Okay, well, you know. And the media asked, so are you also, do you do the same side gig as like Intermountain Aviation? And they're like, oh, we don't do that secret spy stuff. They totally, denied it, and they would have to repeat that. We would be like, we don't do secret spy stuff. And I want to point out that when Evergreen International took over Intermountain Aviation's interests at the airpark, they gained an exclusive rights lease, which in and of itself violated the deed agreement from 1948 because it restricted public access. Because remember, it had to be used for aviation purposes and it had to benefit the public. And so by locking it down from 1975 up till 2012, it was not in accordance with the deed agreement. And this is when they called it the Evergreen Air Center, the EAC. So yeah, they retrofit aircraft. And so what ended up and the reason the question about the CIA kept coming up is because they kept doing weird stuff that was reported. So in May of 1980, Evergreen International got a call and was like, hey, can you transport the former Shah of Iran, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, from Panama to Cairo for cancer treatment? Are you available? Like, and so the Shah had been overthrown in the events leading up to the 1979 Iranian Revolution. So this had just happened. So in the March of 1980, actually this happened a couple weeks after I was born. I was born at the end of February 1980. And so they transported the Shah of Iran from Panama, where he was in exile after he was fled the country for his life, and transported him. And they're like, who would make a request like that from a normal aviation company? And Evergreen International's like, I don't know, we were just the middleman in that arrangement. And so it was things like this that they kept doing that were calling questions. And even people I've talked to, I still get things like, there was some kind of article about how Evergreen International admits to like dropping chemicals over various things, and they keep coming up in searches. So, and I just want to preface this by saying, if I disappear, you know where I went. So if I got too close to the truth. So Evergreen International was the organization that locked down the airpark, and when they folded in 2012 is when Pinal County got their airpark back. So the history keeps going in the 80s, but because I've been yapping for like an hour and a half, I'm switching into what I did in terms of evaluating it. So I had an initial list of buildings that included, it was 110 buildings and structures, and I narrowed it down to a list of 70 based off of dates. And what I relied on was that general layout plan. It was critical because that was my baseline. So I could start in World War II. I could see what was still there. I compared it to Google Earth. And here is that 977 pool. You can see it's a weird shape, and it's actually very weirdly constructed. It's up in a berm. It's up way off the ground. And this is partly why I want to continue researching this, is none of the other pools that were built in World War II, they're all at grade. This was the only one that was up elevated. And I think it was because it was built for Black enlisted men. And so they apparently maybe didn't want to see, you know, Black men in swimming trunks and jumping in pools. I don't know, but it's really tall and it's really high. And there aren't any trees to cover anything. So there's more to be done here, but you can see the shape is captured to the right from the general layout plan. The image up top is that supply building that I showed toward the beginning of the lecture. And so that is a building type 8. You can see that building 23 is gone. And so I just kept tracking, and there's the water treatment plant. You can see the how it is similar today, and how some buildings are like building 103 is missing, and there are foundations for 104 that are in the trees. And so this is, I had to develop a history. And I did a really extensive history because Jim Petty also had historic aerial imagery that I used to compare what was there, when was it there, when was it there in the Korean War, what got added in the Korean War, what did Sonora Flying Service do, what did Intermountain Aviation add, what did they take away? And so what I ended up with, out of all those buildings, I ended up with 3 that I recommended eligible for the National Register. And they are all tied to, well, 2 of them are tied to World War II. 1 of them is tied to the Korean War, but all 3 were used by Intermountain Aviation during the Cold War as a CIA proprietary. And we do have some precedents that people have like dismissed, that the Cold War can't be significant in terms of the National Register, and I wholeheartedly disagree, and I will die on that hill, and it is a sword I will fall on. Like some military branches of the military, their historians are like, no, it's not significant. I'm like, au contraire. So I recommended these eligible under World War II, you know, and they also were used during the Korean War, and they were used by Intermountain Aviation during the Cold War for the Soviet and the Black entry in the Vietnams. or Vietnam, and intelligence activities, covert intelligence activities. So we have the Marana Army Airfield Base Engineering and Maintenance Hangar. We have the Marana Army Airfield Control Tower, and we have the Marana Air Base Maintenance Hangar. So the MAAF is my World War II designator, and the MAB is my Korean War, my 50s designator. So I kind of came up with these categories. And so the control tower is really cool. It's still standing. They keep changing their mind of what they want to do with it. It's not, at least as the last time I was out there a year or two ago, it's not safe to go up, but you can see it's still exactly like it was built. That's an image in 1953, but this is a World War II control tower. And for anybody that's been to Kingman, you may recognize this tower because Kingman Army Airfield was a gunnery range. It was different. It served different purposes. There's a lot more cleanup and remediation and like brownfield stuff going out at Kingman because of all the munitions and buried stuff they have out there. But in 1999, they call it a radio control tower, was nominated to the National Register as one of only 2 of this kit that remained. And so this kit was a prefabricated kit. It came out of New Mexico, and in Kingman, it was built on site by Del Webb. And there was only one other example. We discovered that there were 3 left. 2 of them are in Arizona. So it's the same kit. It's the same prefabricated kit. And the whole reason it's listed in the National Register in Kingman is because it was thought to be one of 2 left in the country. I don't know if that other one is still standing. It was, as of the time I did this research on 2 years ago when I did the presentation. So this tower is at most one of 3 left in the country, which I think is really awesome. And it's like, why didn't anyone know? Well, in 1999, who was operating the Airpark? Evergreen International, and they wouldn't let anyone on. So nobody knew it was there. And this is the MAAF Base Engineering and Maintenance Hangar. It's a specific type of hangar. It's called a 120-foot temporary hangar. It's a standard military hangar. All of the post-Pearl Harbor airfields that were pilot training had one. They all had one. Some of them still have them. A lot of them are gone. This is it's identical at either end, so you could pull through, maintain, repair, and it could go out the other side. You wouldn't have to turn it around or pull it back out. It's really incredible condition for having in 2019, but it's still like, it's been out in the desert, like at that time, 75 plus years, and now like 82, it's just incredible condition. The windows are original, the inside, it's wood. And so that's the difference. And that was a key indicator for temporal association, was the wood construction of this hangar, because these temporary mobilization hangars were wood construction in World War II. So you can see from the 1953 yearbook the inside, and how when I was there in 2019, the inside's still there. It does have steel like roof beams, and that was common, but the roof is wood, the sides are wood. The clerestory windows are boarded up, but they're still there. The other side, the windows were open. So you can really see how little has changed. And for a hangar that was only supposed to make it up to 25 years to still be there, and it's still there in 2024, is, I think, super cool. So this next hangar, and the third individual property that I recommended eligible for the National Register, confused me. It is in the spot of what we call a squadron hangar, an OBH-2. And that OBH-2 designation was on the general layout plan. And you'll see it on layout plans for other airfields. And I thought for a long time that this was, and I went inside and I was like, this is steel construction. I'm confused. but it looks just like an OBH2. And I was really puzzled by it. I mean, obviously there've been additions. You can see that and that office side that was added in the enclosed, like, or the covered walkway, and I couldn't figure it out. And I was literally writing, and I switched to the yearbook, and so I realized it's not the same hanger at all. You can see the production line maintenance hangar, which was the OBH2 squadron hangar design, was used for that purpose at Marana, 1942. That is wood. This is steel. This is steel construction. And it's similar. It's a barrel-shaped roof. It looks similar. But when I saw this, when I encountered this yearbook photo, I was like, oh my gosh, it's not the same hangar at all. And so in 1999, there was a huge comprehensive study done on Air Force Base hangars across all the Air Force bases and military installations. It's really awesome for archaeologists and architectural historians that are doing work at airports. It's kind of a must. It's like a must. You need to, like, because it tracks design over time, truss style, materials, like, and it'll tell you after this time you're not going to see these trusses, you're not going to see these shaped roofs. So this hangar is not in that study, and I can't figure it out. And it's one thing on my to-do list that, but at the time of this report and the bits I've been able to kind of additionally research since then, it may be a unique hangar, that this one, the 1942 one, was torn down, but that Hal Dar wanted to recreate, but in steel. It has the same dimensions. It matches the footprint exactly. And that's why I thought for a time that it was the same hangar, but it's not. And it came down to the wood. And this picture, like, it's not the same hangar. Similar, but it's not. So this could represent a transitional style of aircraft hangars that Dar had built to, because he it's like, oh, well, I like the size and dimension, the exact dimension of this, like, keep that, but let's, upgrade this, because maybe the other one was in poor condition, or he didn't want to use it for some reason. But it's not the OBH2 hangar, and I could not figure out which type of hangar this was. So if anyone has any ideas, let me know. I'd love to update my report. So in summary, what ended up with all of this effort was there were 68 architectural resources, so buildings and structures. I took over 370 photographs, and my report is 670 pages long. It is longer than both of my master's theses. I got one master's at U of A, and I did a master's at NAU, and it is double the length. I had to tell the story, though. It needed to be told, and Pinal County, like, wanted me to tell it. So there are 3 properties that I identified as individually eligible for the National Register: the control tower and the 2 hangars under A and C. And I also recommended the historic district, the loop, the cadet loop. Despite all the components that were still at the Pinal Airpark in 2019, there had been too much demolition and removal between an empty space that had been either remained vacant or infilled with incompatible like design, that there was no comprehensive district for the whole airpark. And this took a long time. I enlisted some of my mentors' help, asked around outside SWCA, because I wanted to get it right. But National Register Bulletin 15 specifically states that you can have discontinuous districts, or they call it discontiguous. My Microsoft Word doesn't like that word. But the idea of a discontiguous district is not to create a district where demolition has removed what otherwise would be significant components of that district. It's not meant to piece together bits and pieces that are still left of a larger collective property. That's not the intent of a discontiguous district under Bulletin 15. That space between components cannot be significant, and it was at the Pinal Airpark in every kind of iteration that it had. The buildings that had been demolished in the last 30, 40 years were still important. So that was the only intact, and it was eligible for the 50s because that's when it was built. But it's still operated obviously by Intermountain Aviation. I just couldn't piece it together that it was part of their false front. It was part of the, hey, look over here, because there's nothing going on over here. It was part of their distraction. But it wasn't directly involved in their CIA activities. It was indirectly, but not directly. So that kind of is where what we do as an art form with subjective. I think it's still like important. But you know, I stuck with the 1950s association. Which, you know, anyone will tell you if it's eligible under A or B or C or D, like you don't have to keep going, but I like to evaluate under all of the criteria, and I evaluate under all criteria for both archaeology and for built environment. So I have yapped for like an hour and 40 minutes, but this is the first time I've been able to get all of this comprehensive information out in one go. So I appreciate everyone going. So if anyone has any questions, or I don't know, Jim or Margaret, if she's still on, how you want to do this, but yeah.
Yeah, I'm on, and thank you very much. I've actually been kicked in and out a couple of times. I'm looking at the chat, and it looks like Jim has got quite a few questions. Anyone else has questions? Please feel free to either put them in the chat or come on camera. Jim, since you seem to have the majority of what's in the chat, do you want to go ahead and answer your questions directly?
Sure. Let's see if I can start from the beginning. Where was the first one? Oh, I guess, well, here it is. Is there a map of all World War II facilities in Arizona, including airfields, bases, POW camps, internment camps, major manufacturing plants, agricultural land for military uses, etc.?
I've never seen one. I would guess that something like that exists. Whether we have access to it, I do not know. Because if you think about it, a lot of our World War II properties were reused. And I will say that the tenant out there now, Ascent Aviation, is awesome. They retrofit aircraft for wildland firefighting. I'm not joking. That's what they do. They're in Kingman. They're in a lot of different airports in Arizona. And I asked them a lot of questions about, you know, what they do, what's there. I was not allowed in certain places. And it's really interesting. And I would love to map out and that's been something I've been thinking about doing, especially going to like airport conferences, is mapping out all the World War II airfields and distinguishing them between the pre ones like Falcon Field, and then the post Pearl Harbor ones. And then, yeah, I don't, because there's not any one military organization that owns all of it. And like Pinal Airpark is now county. Bisbee Douglas is, you know, not owned by the military anymore. And so a lot of these have transferred over. The Navajo depot up west of Flagstaff, I've done a ton of work on Camp Navajo. They were also a military ordnance depot for ordnance storage. And there's stuff going on out there. I wasn't allowed in certain places and had to keep my cell phone away because I could trigger something. And so we've still got a lot of sensitive stuff like going on.
Sure.
So And you know, that's the National Guard training is up at Camp Navajo. There's National Guard training going on at Pinal. So in my brain, it's either the Army, or because the Army Air Force was one organization that was split into two. And we still have Air Force bases that took up some of these World War II spaces. And then we have Army that also took up that. So this may be an effort that a historian that we do, that type of thing, because how amazing would that be to see? Because also like elevations, topography, and I forgot to add, this is so important, these airfields had auxiliary airfields. They're tiny little squares that they call landing mats, and they usually, some of them look like tic-tac-toe, some of them were different shaped. That Kingman had 6 or 7. Marana had 5, and you can still see them. You can still, one of them is the Gilderport little airfield. One of them is out by Durham landfill. One of them's out north of Picacho, and one of them is the Marana Regional Airport. So that, like, even though there weren't really very many like facilities, like the Marana Regional Airport got its start. And while there's nothing left of World War II, the alignment of 2 of its runways is from World War II. And so I love doing that too. So there, you can see these layered landscapes of, you wouldn't think like Marana Regional Airport, it was built really in 1969 there, you know, as a private airport, but it still had ties to World War II because it was a training field. They do the touch and go landings. The students would come in and then they come in at a different angle. And it was reactivated with the Korean War. Not all 5 were, 4 of them were, and Marana Regional Airport was reactivated as part of DAR's training school. Gotcha. So you can start to see these branches that go out and the connections that these airfields have. And what we really need, and what, like I said, is really kind of a passion of mine, is doing a World War II context for all of Arizona for these airfields. Because I kind of I adapt them for each one, but we really need a comprehensive one to discuss all of the airfields. They'll be divided up into those 2 kind of themes. And then the ones that, you know, like that didn't train pilots. Camp Navajo didn't train pilots. It was solely for ordnance. So was Fort Wingate in New Mexico. And so these layers of history are just so fascinating. And so it's like, that's why I challenge people, is when you go out to an airport, like, who would have thought Pinal Airpark had all this stuff going on, right? You know, so it's
so Jack asks, did you come across any connections to Grand Canyon Red Butte Airport?
So hi Jack, I haven't seen you in a while. That airport up there, the one near Red Butte, predates yeah, that predates World War II. Like Winslow does. Winslow does as well. And those tiny airfields that weren't, like, you wonder if they had a function. And Jack actually has done some really great research on those indicator arrows between airfields, like when a pilot's going and you're like, where's my airport? And it's like, hey, go this way. Jack, I'd be curious to know about how if that connects, because our airports, our airfields, our aviation landscape, which takes up the whole state, and you know, it extends beyond, but Arizona is such a unique climate, and there were so many airfields that they're all connected, and they all, you know, why wouldn't they land at Grand Canyon Airport next to Red Butte? Or I do know at Winslow they did do some auxiliary activities, but again, Winslow predates World War II. They do fire, they have at various points in their history had firefighting capabilities and refueling and retardant mixing tanks and stuff like that. But And that's another theme, is the wildland firefighting network that was established in the 60s at so many of these these reactivated World War II airports that became that, like Cochise County Airport. It was built during World War II, but it wasn't a training. It was meant to back up to serve as an emergency backup to Bisbee. And it was built by the Civil Air Patrol. That's why it doesn't follow military standard. So it's so, I'm nerding out, but it's so cool. It's like, you've got this, when you see an airport in Arizona and it is very square, it's it looks like one of those triangles that an architect might do, or it's a square, or it has right angles. Chances are it's a military World War II airport, because they were so meticulous with their thing. But the V-shaped, like you get at Cochise County, and the more acute angles, I look at those and I immediately think, I think that might be something later. But I was wrong about Cochise County. It was World War II, but it wasn't ever used during World War II. It was just built as a backup by the Civil Air Patrol. So we've got that theme too here, that layer of civilian service as well. So, and aviation history in Arizona is incredible.
Right.
Yeah.
Jack, did you want to follow up, or is that somebody else?
Oh, sorry. This is Margaret. I was going to add, Jack and Annie, just FYI, they actually did train pilots in Williams at the Williams Airport during World War II.
They did. Yep. And Williams. Yeah, I did my very first airport work was at the a tiny little hangar at the airport in Williams. So
yeah, they did.
Annie?
Sorry, go ahead, Jim.
Annie, are there any physical remnants of the Fulton Skyhook, or those early parachutes that you had on the screen?
No, I don't. So there's a whole trove of artifacts and photos at the Pima Air and Space Museum that I've been invited to go dive into. Jim Petty made, those connections there. And there's a book that was written that I'm trying to track down that is out of print. That is all about airfields, World War II airfields in Arizona. And they've got a ton of photos. I don't know of any like physical remnants, but you gotta wonder. They build upon that technology, and they do all of those, those types of things, and we still use some of the technology that was developed during the Cold War and at those. I have the article if anyone wants to see it, of the cargo drop systems. It's this conveyor belt of wheels in the back of a giant like C-130, and they just start to pushing out the supply drops. But we see like humanitarian supply drops happen all the time, like, and in rapid succession. And all that technology is built on one another. So and I don't know, because there are still things that we don't know. There are still things that are classified. There are still activities that, that are classified, and things going on. And I'm very passionate about the CIA, because I was going to work for the CIA. I was an Arabic linguist and went through the CIA processing, and I was subject to, my background check took 18 months. Random people would show up to family and people I hadn't talked to in years. Everyone thought I was in trouble. And I just love the history of intelligence. I minored in it. I took a lot of intelligence classes through the School of Public Policy at the University of Arizona. And so the history of intelligence is super fascinating. And I would totally nerd out as an archaeologist with that kind of stuff. But I don't know. I have to say yes, because there's so many things out there, but we just don't know. We don't have the full picture at all.
Give us a report when you unravel the
It'll be
air.
like, does anyone know where Annie is? Where did she disappear to? My reviewer at SHPO, Dave Jacobs, because I turned in this report, and then we had the Arizona Preservation Conference in Prescott at the Hassayampa, and I love Dave Jacobs. He was like, no, Annie, you have to be worried. He's like, this is really, like, this is no joke what you put it in. I said, it's all public record, Dave. And he was just he's like, well, if something happens, like, are you going to be okay? I'm like, oh, thanks. But yeah.
So, one more question from me, at least. And does anyone else have a question? I don't want to dominate, but so you mentioned the current owner of the Airpark, and then you provide, ideas for National Register nominations. We have to get owner consent, correct, to advance such nominations.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and there's that gray area, like because the law says private landowner, so there's that, like, Pinal Airpark was all for this. Like, Jim is excited to have these nominated, and we've been talking about grants, and we've been talking about public programs that we can do. Like, they want to preserve these things, which is really cool, because as a county, as a public entity, they could easily just were like, no, we don't want, but they are passionate about the preservation of the Airpark and its legacy, and including those eligible resources. So
very cool. Very cool. Are there any other questions, comments out there from our guests? Well, if not, Margaret, you want to?
No, I was just going to say thanks, everyone, and remind everyone that this is recorded, and we will make the recording available on the APF YouTube site, which Jim popped the link to it in the chat. And as well as our contact information, if there's any follow-up information. Thank you so much, Annie. That was just an amazing amount of information.
Please ask questions. Please, reach out. I love talking. And yes, Jim, I did overlay the World War II plan on top of aerial imagery and just went through to see what was left. So a lot of foundations, but yeah.
Great.
And I second Jim's suggestion that you write a book, but another time.
There is a book called Project Cold Feet, and neither Jim nor I knew about it when we did this research in 2019. And so I have that citation, but it's like I'm too afraid to read it, to see if I was really right or really wrong. Because mine was all declassified CIA documents and newspaper articles. So, but I have it. It's on my shelf. So
there you go.
All
right. Thanks again, Annie. Sorry, Jim, did I cut you off?
Thank you all for hearing me. Yeah, for almost 2 hours. So
totally. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye. Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.